Good morning. We're learning Rabbi Steif's holy book, Mitzvos Hashem, and we're learning about everything we need to know, and every human being needs to know about how to serve God Almighty, how to be connected to God Almighty, to follow God Almighty's instructions, what's in this and each human being's best interest. And we're focused now on the laws of idolatry and against idolatry, what we have to do to avoid idolatry, any connection whatsoever to idolatry. And we're continuing here with another application of our caution, our carefulness, our staying away from any form of idolatry. And what this relates to, and what the halachas, what the Torah laws that we're going to learn today relate to, is ensuring that there's not an inappropriate dilution of the spiritual clarity of the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And these relate to halachas, instructions from God Almighty on how to make sure that our spiritual clarity, both of the Jews and the non-Jews, remains intact. And this relates to instructions on not creating intermixtures and intermarriage. And we're going to see also in terms of being careful of interactions with people who are suspected or presumed to be ungrounded in their awareness of their divine image, and therefore their conduct is not going to be in accordance with the laws that God Almighty commands to every single human being. And therefore we have to take precautions not only to guard ourselves spiritually, but to guard ourselves physically from situations that could lead to very unfortunate consequences. So we're going to go through this together. So I wanted to start with a preamble to understand the importance of these laws and why we have to understand what the real intention is over here. Because some people want to say, oh, you see, since the Jewish people are not intermarrying and they're taking precautions to make sure not to intermarry, that this shows something that is then used to attack the Jewish people for being standoffish and so forth. And we have to understand what is really the intention over here. So we see that a Jewish person is not allowed to marry a non-Jewish person, and a non-Jewish person is not allowed to marry a Jewish person. So the first thing we have to understand is what's the reason for this. Now, this is not about keeping any form of spiritual purity, physical purity. It's not about keeping physical purity. It's not like there's some concept in Torah that a person from a particular background. There are certain nations we're going to see in the Torah where intermarriage is, even a person who converts is not permitted for a certain number of generations and so forth, because of poor character traits that nation exhibited. But it's not because of a physical characteristic. So, for example, we see that there's Jewish people, all backgrounds, all colors, from all ethnic groups, and any human being that is convinced of the correctness of him or her taking upon themselves the mission of the Jewish people and the allegiance to God Almighty and the performance of the 613 commandments and all the many, many infinite details of those commandments and all the rabbinic commandments, and says that this is what they feel the calling of their soul is, which is to become a ger tzedek, to become a righteous convert, is something that they're admitted to become a convert. So, and they become fully qualified as children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, And this shows us that every human being, if they feel that this is their calling in life, and they show the right dedication and the right intentions in doing that, then they are admitted into the Jewish people to be one of the people sharing the responsibility to carry the message, God Almighty's message of the Torah and the divine blueprint for all humanity is brought into the Jewish people and welcomed to become full-fledged as a Jewish person. So that tells us that any rules against intermarriage, and we're going to see the rules against about getting into contact and where the outcome could be marriage, and the interaction could lead to marriage, either the people who are directly involved or between themselves of their children, marrying their children to each other, then that's not permitted. But the reason it's not permitted is not because of a physical issue. It's not because of keeping a pure physical lineage. On the contrary, the Jewish people welcomes people who are committed to living every aspect of their life as a child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's not a physical issue. And another point that we could see that is not a physical issue in terms of maintaining second, I see. Hold on a second. I don't know if you see the screen, but hold on 1 second. Sorry, but someone was trying to call me, and just gonna send them a message. Because it causes my phone the phone serves as the camera, it causes it to vibrate. Second. I just want to send a message so he doesn't call back again. Okay. So another way to see that this is not about a physical, keeping some sort of physical purity, is that not only is any human being able to convert to become a Jew, convert to become a son of or daughter of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also we see that if there is an inappropriate relationship and there is a child fathered by a non-Jew, but the mother is Jewish, that the child is Jewish, regardless of what that father's nationality is, race, ethnicity, and color, skin of their color of their skin, and so forth. So that child is, if the mother is Jewish, that child is fully Jewish because the lineage of the born Jewish lineage is through the mother. So what then is the reason that a Jew has to be aware that they cannot marry a non-Jew, and a non-Jew has to be aware, also equally aware, that they cannot marry a Jew? Because it's about keeping spiritual clarity. It's about knowing and understanding that the Jewish people have a mission in the world, and that mission is to preserve the divine teachings of God Almighty and to make sure that they come into the world in every time, in every generation, in every place, completely untainted, completely unadulterated. They can't be watered down in even the slightest way. Even a hesitation about saying something that needs to be said when it needs to be said is itself an adulteration and watering down of the tradition of the Torah, the tradition of what's passed down from every single generation, generation to generation. So this spiritual clarity has to be maintained. So the light is going to stay on for the benefit of the entire world. The light of the divine message in the world has to stay burning brightly, has to stay burning clearly. And if there's going to be an intermarriage between a person who is divinely responsible for this clarity to the entire world, is going to get distracted and say it's okay to marry somebody who doesn't have that clarity and doesn't have that degree of responsibility, that is going to affect the entire world. Meaning to say, it's something that's a calamity for the entire world. The Lubavitcher says intermarriage is a calamity. Well, it's not just a calamity for the Jewish people in the sense that this Jew who is responsible for the preservation and continuation of the entire Torah message to the world is now going to become married to a non-Jewish person. And if the mother if it's a Jewish man marrying a non-Jewish woman, then the children are not going to be Jewish. And even if it's the father that's not Jewish and the mother that's Jewish, so the children are Jewish, but they're going to be raised in a non-Jewish environment, meaning to say they're not going to be raised with the dedication to the service of God Almighty that's going to be the continuation of the teachings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's a spiritual calamity for the entire world, because an additional soul that was brought down into the world for the purpose was meant for he brought down these two this child to be born and raised in an environment and a surrounding that's going to maximize their potential to bring God Almighty's message of hope to the entire world. That now getting distracted that a person is going to be raised in an environment that's not going to be promoting that, not going to be honoring that, is now a calamity for the entire world. And if the child is not going to be Jewish because the mother is the one who's not Jewish in that relationship, then it's not that person is not a wonderful human being. They're a fantastic human being. They're created in God Almighty's image also. That human being that's created is in God Almighty's image, and they have a divine role in the world, and they have a responsibility to bring righteousness into the world and fulfill all the commandments that God Almighty has commanded the Jewish people. They're not written off as a human being. But what the energy of the parent was meant to be directed into connecting with a Jewish spouse and bringing another Jewish soul into the world that's going to then be that light unto the nations. That was what was the missed opportunity. That's a calamity, because the world needs as many people as possible that are going to fulfill their mission as Jews and be authentic and loyal to that mission. And the world needs the non-Jews to be loyal and authentic to their mission. So this is why the Torah comes and tells us, don't marry, don't create these relationships that are going to end in intermarriage. Because the person themselves could be a fantastic person. As a matter of fact, the non-Jew that you're going to create this interaction with is obviously a nice person, obviously a wonderful person. That's why you're sitting with him and you're having a social interaction, because they're nice people and they're good people. But the Torah is saying you have to set boundaries to make sure that what is not meant to be doesn't happen. Now we see this concept among all people, among Jewish people. There's a concept of, for example, of yichud. Yichud means to say, and this is something that applies also to non-Jews. The concept of yichud means to say, yichud means, we know that we've learned together yichud Hashem, the unity of God. Unity means to say that there's nothing besides God Almighty. it applies also in the interactions between human beings. It's forbidden for a man to be in isolation with a woman that's not his wife. No matter how wonderful and how spiritual and how observant of God's laws a man is, and no matter how observant of God's laws the woman is, it is forbidden for the two of them to be in isolation if they're not married. Isolation means to say to be in the same room together, even momentarily, where there's not other people around, and there's not that imminent possibility of other people coming into the room. So to be secluded in any way is something that's forbidden. And there's many, many laws about that, and many, many details of that a person needs to learn. It also could be more than one person, depending on who the people are and what their level of commitment to God Almighty's vision is, and that they're themselves moral people. Even if you have a bunch of people who are immoral, they can't have this isolation with them. So we see that we go to great lengths to prevent any inappropriate outcomes, any inappropriate consequences of our actions, because we are human beings. And if a human man is put into the same room with a human woman, then by God Almighty's design, it's meant to be that something is supposed to happen. Even, for example, a man is not allowed to shake hands with a woman that's not his wife. Why? Because shaking hands is a expression of physical connection, and that's inappropriate between a man and a woman that are not married to each other. So we see that we all have to be aware of what they have an expression, stay in our lane. Each person has to stay in their lane. We have to be aware. The man has a responsibility. He has a wife. The wife has a husband. That is the only physical contact they're allowed between a man and a woman. And that is, they're not allowed to be in isolation with any other person. So that's by way of background to see what we're going to learn now, how it's setting for us the proper boundaries to respect our roles and responsibilities and respect the other person's roles and responsibilities. And it's not leading to a good consequence for either person to have a confused situation. So just like, for example, you would say, okay, well, the man is married, but the woman's unmarried. So the man is not doing something right by being in contact in isolation with this woman, but maybe what she's doing is not as, no. 1 second here. They're all getting involved in something that's not appropriate. And same thing is for a non-Jew to realize that even though they might say, listen, this Jew is not religious, he's not observant. So he's not observant anyway. So if he's going to get into a relationship with a non-Jewish spouse and have children with that person, then that is, why is that the non-Jew's responsibility? No, because it's a mixture that is now bringing murkiness to the world, that the world is not, it now has a couple that is not clear about their respective roles and responsibilities. And as much as we'd like to say, oh, they're going to respect each other and so forth, but the fact of the matter is that they're both inhibited from following and doing exactly what they're supposed to do in the world. And that is what we are going to understand now, why there are these different rules. So the first rules that we're going to see about the interaction between Jews and non-Jews are because the non-Jew is really a fantastic person, and we're concerned about the fact that they're so wonderful and they're such a nice person is going to lead to a closeness of the hearts. And then that's going to lead to a marriage, an interaction that's going to lead to a spiritual lack of clarity. Then we're going to see that there's laws that apply to non-Jews that are not acting as wonderful people. And we have to be careful because they will tend to win. And we see this. This is just, we're talking about this all the time. If we take God out of a person's understanding, we take God out of a person's way he's living, then he becomes even worse than an animal, because now an animal does not go around and just destroy the world, but a human being that is disconnected from God Almighty ends up stealing, ends up murdering, God forbid, and ends up being immoral. So in addition to the idolatry, which we're learning about right now. So let's jump in over here and share the screen. And I'd love to have some questions, so please share questions. And we see over here Yudches.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to understand. So if a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman and she converts, their children are not considered Jewish? Is
No,
that
so
what you're
let's
saying?
clarify that. First of all, a Jewish man can't marry a non-Jewish woman.
Okay, I understand, but if he
Now,
does,
if she converts, if the woman converts before they get married and not for the sake of the marriage, okay, because conversion is not allowed just for the sake of marrying a Jewish person, or the Jewish person marrying
Okay.
another person. If she converts properly according to Torah law,
right?
and accepts upon herself all the commandments, all God Almighty's commandments that apply to the Jewish people specific, in addition to the basic commandments that apply to every single human being, but in addition to the commandments that apply to the Jewish people specifically, then all her offspring are considered Jewish. They are fully Jewish.
Okay. Okay, that clears it up. Thank you.
Okay. So we are over here on paragraph 18, Yud Ches, on page Shin Lamed, which is 330. So everyone can see this? Okay, great. Goy ha'isa mishte l'chupa b'nei ibitoi. Now we've discussed before, the word goy is a word that means nation. Goyim means nations. And this is referring sometimes to the Jewish people. Sometimes it's referring to the non-Jewish people. So you could see, for example, we're now learning the story of how God Almighty took the Jewish people out of Egypt. We're going through those Torah portions, and it says that God Almighty took goy mekarev goy. He took a nation out of a nation. So the word goy refers to the Jewish people and also refers to the Egyptians. And we see that there's different times the prophets refer to the Jewish people as goy, and we see that the non-Jews refer to goy. So it's not a derogatory term. It's not a it's a term that's used both referring to the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people, because it means to say it means to say a nation. Now, it is used more. You have to understand the context, and it's used more commonly. Like in this context, it's referring to a non-Jew. Okay, this is what it says goy, referring here to a non-Jew. He makes a lechupas b'nei or bita. He's making a wedding ceremony for his. So mishta means to say like a dinner celebration. Lechupas b'nei or bita. Chuppah means to say the marriage ceremony, the wedding ceremony, for the marriage of his son or his daughter. It's forbidden for a Jewish person to eat there, even if he is going to eat his own. And even if he comes with his own waiter, his own assistant, who's going to serve him the food. So he's not only that he's bringing his own food, but he has his own attendant who's going to make sure that he's eating only the kosher food. If he's going to, if the non-Jew who's making the wedding sends to the house of the Jew live chickens or fish, then it's permissible. So because we don't have to, if it's a chicken's alive, we can still be slaughtered to be kosher. So there's obviously here we're concerned about the closeness and what goes on at a wedding celebration, and not getting involved in that. And also we could be concerned about that there's could be elements of idolatry in aspects of wedding ceremonies and stuff like that we want to be careful about. Okay, so that's Yud Ches. Yud Tes. There are also other things that the sages forbid. And even though I'm over here, even though these forbidden things are not fundamentals from the Torah, they decreed upon these things to make a separation, to stay away from the Jewish people, should stay away from the nations. So that until, or to such an extent that they should not mix with should not mix into them, Jewish people, and come to marriages. What are these things that are forbidden? It's forbidden to drink with them alcoholic beverages at the non-Jewish gatherings. So if the non-Jews are having a party, a big dinner, some sort of event, a Jewish person can't drink with them, drinking alcoholic beverages. Even though it's cooked wine, there's nothing forbidden, meaning to say that it was wine. What are we concerned about wine in general? That a non-Jewish person is going to be who's idolatrous is going to dedicate the wine to the purpose of idolatry, and therefore we've just been learning this entire section that you can't drink that wine. It's forbidden because it's a product of the service of idolatry, and it's an offering to idolatry, and it's used for the service of idolatry. So you can't drink that. That's forbidden. But even if it's cooked, and cooked wine, well, that means you boil it. Cooked wine is no longer considered really wine because it's no longer as good as the uncooked wine. No one's going to offer cooked wine to an idol. So even though this is not forbidden, so if, however, the majority of the gathering of this masiba means a gathering or they're sitting together, so this meal were Jewish, it's permissible. So we see here that the problem is not that Jews and non-Jews are going to sit together and have l'chaim, have a drink together. The problem is, what is the context of the situation? If it's majority Jews and minority is non-Jewish, then it's okay to, he's saying over here, to drink it. But if the majority, however, so for example, if you're having an event and the majority of the neighbors, let's say, come together and the majority are Jewish and they're saying, l'chaim, drinking something, some wine, as long as it's kosher wine, then that's okay. Because it's not that there's a problem with drinking with the non-Jew. It's the problem is, what's the context? If you're actually going to come and mix in, the Jew is going to come in, he's in a room with a majority of non-Jews, the whole atmosphere is a non-Jewish atmosphere, and the drinking is going on, our concern is he's going to become subsumed into the attitude and into the direction of this event. But if he's in a majority Jewish event, then we don't have the concern that he's going to become consumed into the non-Jewish perspective and into marrying his children off to the non-Jews. So, it's also forbidden the beer of non-Jews, not just the wine. And the beer is not a problem because we're not worried about forbidden ingredients in barley or fermented wheat. and we are not, it's not wine, that the beer is not used for idolatry, so we don't have any of those problems, but still it's forbidden to the beer of the non-Jew. Why? But this is below asu elu b'beis shagoy. This only applies if you're going, the Jew is going into the non-Jewish house and he's going to drink there. And he's kovea means to fix, to establish himself to drink. Meaning to say, if he goes there and he like settles down, I'm going to come over to your house and we're going to sit together and we're going to drink beer. Men do this. They get together and they have a beer drinking experience. That's like he's kovea himself there. He's not like he's passing through. And the guy says, "Hey, you want to say, L'chaim? You want to say something? You want to have a quick drink?" No, he's kovea himself to drink. This is forbidden. But if the non-Jew brings his beer to the Jew's house, then it's permissible. They could sit and drink the beer together. And even in the house of the non-Jew, if he's drinking it in a temporary way, and not sitting down and becoming a whole experience, but rather it's arai, meaning to say it is in it's a temporary experience, a passing experience, and it just happened, as opposed to we're setting a beer drinking date every Saturday night, and we're going to drink beer every Saturday. But meaning to say that would be permissible. So if it's something that is not is in a way that the Jew is sitting down and really becoming part of a whole drinking experience, and it's also not something that's established as it just happened. Like he's there, and the non-Jew says to him, let's have a beer. Let's have a beer. So if you sit down at his table to have the beer, and you're not sitting there for a whole experience, but yes, let's have a beer, and it happened to come into being. Not that everything is from God Almighty, but I'm saying you didn't plan it out as a beer date, then that's permissible. So we see it's about the context. There's nothing wrong with drinking beer with a non-Jew. If he brings the beer to your house, have a beer. If even in his house, if it just comes kind of like spontaneously, that's a better way to try, or spontaneously. Oh, Rabbi, have a beer. Okay, open the beer. We're gonna say a blessing on the beer, and we're gonna say L'chaim. Happens spontaneously, and it's not in the way of a full in-depth experience, then that's also permissible. And it's also forbidden to eat the pitan. Pita means, if you know, pita is like a circular Middle Eastern type of bread that's very prevalent among the Mediterranean communities, particularly in the Jewish and the Arab world. And that refers to any bread in this context. So it's forbidden to eat their bread, meaning to say if a non-Jew makes bread in his oven, even though it's 100% kosher, it's forbidden for a Jew to eat that bread, because that's the kind of thing that is going to lead to that sense of closeness that's going to lead to an intermarriage. And also it's forbidden to eat the cooking of a non-Jew, even though it is 100% kosher. Even though in a place where there's no reason to suspect or be worried about any forbidden mixtures whatsoever, any forbidden content, and so forth. And they're all the reason for this gezerah, for this decree not to do these things, is because of weddings. that a non-Jew shouldn't invite the Jew to join him by his meal. So the Jew could come to the non-Jew could come to the Jew's house and eat the Jew's food. And the non-Jew could bring his beer to the Jew's house and they could drink it together. And the Jew could, in a passing way, spontaneous and passing way, drink the beer by the non-Jew's house. But we don't want a situation where the non-Jew is creating a meal, and now the Jew is going to go there and he's going to say to himself, listen, I know that this non-Jew does not use any non-kosher ingredients. The bread he's making, bread doesn't require non-kosher ingredients. The bread is made in an oven that's not a problem. And all the food that's being served, he's going to serve fish, and it's cooked in a way. This person is very, very careful. He doesn't eat any non-kosher meat. Let's say however the situation is, you come to this conclusion. It's the reason that Jewish person can't go to do that is because of this. That we don't want to have the intermarriages. So you also So why is Rabbi Steif putting this in a book that's intended for non-Jews to know the laws that apply to them? Because a non-Jew has to know this also. He has to realize that it's to his benefit. It's to her benefit, not to lead to something that's going to create a confusion in the world. They're going to create a confusion in this spiritual clarity that's absolute. The whole world depends on it. We're saying we know that the world depends on the clarity of the Torah. Our lives depend on the clarity of the Torah. We see what happens when there's a lack of clarity. And it's very interesting that the correlation between the great upheavals against the Jewish people and the level that preceded what preceded that was the level of assimilation and lack of clarity. So we see, if we go through the different generations, whether it's the Greeks or the Romans, or in Spain in the massive conversions, and then the Inquisition to persecute those who had converted to Catholicism, to find out whether they were really sincere conversions from Judaism to Catholicism. And then in Germany, before the war, the Jewish people were extremely integrated into German society. In fact, it's very interesting. The head of the Berlin police department's counterintelligence unit was a Jewish man, Jewish police officer. He was so senior in the Berlin police that he was the head of intelligence for the Berlin police, or head of counterintelligence, and he was personally responsible in the 1920s for arresting the Nazi leadership. This shows you that obviously the German people as a whole, they arrested the Nazis as anti-German thugs who were criminals. And who was the head of that? Who was the head of the intelligence that was responsible for tracking these people and arresting them and so forth? Was a Jewish guy. So it shows you that that's how integrated the Jews were into German society. They were not some marginalized people that out there that no one had interaction with. In the core of German society were Jewish people. But because those Jewish people were assimilated, they were no longer showing the clarity. They were no longer bringing the message of clarity to the world. They were subsumed into the German society, even though they were Jewish and they were known as Jewish. Everyone knew they were Jewish, because when the Nazis came and threw them all out of their positions, they knew exactly who was Jewish. So it wasn't secret that they were Jewish. They could tell also from their names. But the issue was, because of that blurring, then there was no longer a clear voice of the Torah. So the entire German society suffered as a result. Because if there's clarity, the Jewish people have clarity, and they have the spiritual clarity to say what needs to be said and bring God Almighty's message to the world in every time and every place, then the end result is that the whole world benefits. Like the Lubavitch Rebbe writes, if the non-Jews of Europe had been observant of the 7 laws of Noah, there would not have been a Holocaust. And when we say the Holocaust is the millions of Jews that died, but there was also tens of millions of non-Jews that died between the extermination camps and extermination programs that affected the non-Jews, and the massive warfare that happened because of the whole approach of destroying Europe that the Nazis brought to implement. That was their goal, to destroy Europe and to destroy every aspect of European civilization. They're like the battering ram. So we're talking about tens and tens of millions of human beings that perished as a result of that, of the confusion, of the lack of clarity. So when you see that the non-Jews are going in the direction of not observing the laws that apply to the non-Jews, it's because the Jews are not teaching them, and the Jews are not teaching them because they're lacking clarity and they've become subsumed and assimilated and intermarried, and therefore there's that lack of clarity. So our job is to say, one second, there has to be clarity. There has to be clarity as to responsibility, and that Jew has to know that he has a responsibility to provide guidance to the entire world. And in that case, we're talking about, let's say, in Berlin. Then to the people in Berlin. And it's interesting that there were rabbis who warned in the 1800s and 1860s. They warned that there would be a tremendous destruction coming against the Jewish people from Berlin. We're talking about 50, 60, 70 years before it happened. They saw that because the Jewish people were losing that clarity, that there would be this period of this wonderful acceptance and this wonderful, it seems like wonderful acceptance, and it's okay, everyone accepts the Jewish judges and everyone accepts the Jewish head of intelligence for the Berlin Police Department, and everyone accepts the Jewish people in the business, and it looks like it's so fantastic. But it will always lead to absolute disaster for the Jews and the non-Jews, because the non-Jews will, while they're open and embracing of the Jews that are assimilated, they'll welcome them to the table to eat at the wedding, they'll welcome to the table to eat at the restaurant, to eat with them, and they'll even go to accommodate them. They'll even bring them kosher food to make them comfortable. But at the same time, the end result is, because of that lack of clarity, then the whole civilization collapses into the chaos that comes from being disconnected from God Almighty. And the end result is, who's the first target when the civilization collapses? Is the Jewish people. Why are the Jewish people the first target if they're so assimilated? Because the Jew still is permanently and inseparably connected to the fact that he's a child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His very existence represents the moral standard bearer of the world. And once the humanity as a whole in that particular situation becomes disconnected from God Almighty, they want to be able to do whatever they want. They want to be able to be immoral. They want to be able to steal. They want to be able to murder, as we see the institutionalization of murder as part of the Nazi regime. That's just the way human beings go. It's not particular to the Nazis. They were just very efficient at it, but that's the way every society will go. Most societies that fall into murder are going to be people shooting each other in the streets, and terror gangs and gangs and mobs and mafias and so on and so forth. But the Nazis institutionalized it as a state structure of efficiency. So that's what we have to understand, that this is where society goes, this is where humanity goes. So they're going to say, well, who poses the biggest conflict with this direction that they're going in, the Jewish people. Because even the assimilated Jew that's participating with them in their operation of society, they're participating with them in their social scene. That Jew still is a constant, annoying reminder that there's a higher standard. And even if that Jew is not himself keeping the higher standard, but his very presence, his very existence as a Jew is a reminder of the higher standard. And that Jew always has the possibility at any moment to snap back to his spiritual center and then not only re-center himself and ground himself in the knowledge of nothing besides God Almighty, but he's now going to start teaching everyone else. And if he starts being a clear voice to tell everyone else what's right and wrong, then he's going to throw everyone off from the descent into chaos. And those that are committed to the descent into chaos don't want that to happen. So the first place that has to be attacked is the Jewish people. So the lack of spiritual clarity, and God forbid that should happen, but we see that happens in every single generation. Every generation, as Rabbi Gafni, Shlita, my wonderful, incredible Rosh Hashiva, said, then every society where the Jewish people were not actively teaching the Sheva Mitzvot, we're not actively teaching the non-Jews but the laws that apply to them, it ended in disaster for the Jewish people. Because the lack of teaching and being an inspiration to the non-Jews is itself an aspect of assimilation. Meaning to say, even though the Jew may still look like a Jew and he's still acting like a Jew and he's going to the synagogue as a Jew, but when he's not playing his role, when he's not doing his role of actively influencing the non-Jews around him, then they are left untethered. They are left just floating in the wind by whatever wind is going to come along. And what wind will come along is some wind of fear and a wind of agitation and a wind of taking them, the whole society around them, off target, into believing that there's the problems in the world, and the problems are eventually the Jews are going to be pointed to be the problem. So we have to realize that so the non-Jew over here is saying, well, one second, why is it fair that this Jew can't come to his house or come to his event and sit and drink beer or bring his own wine and sit and drink wine? Why is it fair? No, it's for the non-Jew's benefit also. In fact, the non-Jew is the ultimate beneficiary, because the Jew is at risk from the consequences of the lack of spiritual clarity, but the non-Jew is also at risk. Not only is there lack of spiritual clarity in his life, but he's going to devolve into activities that are completely destructive of his own soul. So if he's going to become a murderer, and we talk about, how could a non-Jew be a murderer? But we see that's the practical reality, that if a human being is not aware on an every moment basis that there's an eye that sees and an ear sees, that an ear that hears, there's a God Almighty creating them and lovingly creating them and examining them and looking at them and so forth. If he doesn't feel that, if he doesn't sense that at every moment, he will then go ahead and do whatever comes to his heart and mind to do. And maybe he'll behave himself while there's a police officer around. But if there's no police officer, then the world descends into a jungle. And if the non-Jew is clever enough to become the police force, the non-Jew who is disconnected from his awareness of God Almighty and descending into immorality and theft and murder, he becomes the police force. Now you have an institutionalized murder. So that's not just bad for his victims, it's bad for him. The human being who so loses sight of the fact that he's created in God Almighty's image that he becomes a murderer, the tragedy is not only for the victim of his murder, but the tragedy is for that human being. And it says that a court of Jewish law, the Sanhedrin, that had to execute one murderer in 70 years was called a destructive court. Why? Because that represented that they had failed as a court in terms of influencing and bettering the conduct of the people, and that the murder occurred. It's not that capital punishment is wrong. Capital punishment is part of the Torah system of justice, but the fact that a human being killed someone else, that he had to be then put on trial and then found guilty and then murdered, is the responsibility of the judges for the failure to properly teach the people and guide the people. So therefore, we need to understand that this is what we have to recognize, both Jews and non-Jews, the urgency of this clarity and this small details, like who you and how and what circumstances you're spending your time relaxing and drinking beer with, actually impacts the world as a whole. So now we can go up to number 20, paragraph 20. And the sages forbade a number of other things. And we'll continue this next week because we're now at 7:55. Any questions before we conclude?
Sorry, Rabbi,
Yes.
you mentioned social gatherings where the majority of the people in attendance are Jewish. But today there are also, seems, whole sections of, people who adhere to doctrine about, who are not as careful about preserving the, not intermarrying in different faiths. So is that still a reliable measure, or if it's, you also have to take into account those people's beliefs or doctrines that they hold to?
Not understanding. I'm not following your question. Can you clarify?
If the majority of those people are not as careful about preserving the
if you're saying, okay, I think I got to say, if you're saying it's permissible to be in a gathering with majority Jews and a minority of non-Jews, but the majority who are Jews, it'd be a gathering where there's going to be drinking and to drink with everybody. But if the majority who are Jews are not themselves observant and they're inclined to lack of spirit, don't have spiritual clarity themselves, and therefore they're not going to be careful about how they interact and what things lead to with the non-Jewish participants, then that's a great question. That's you have to, this is all contextual. It's meant to protect you and everyone else. So you have to see the situation. If it's inappropriate, then it's definitely inappropriate. And the fact of the matter is, you're raising a very, very good point. If the attitude of the participants, both the Jewish and the non-Jewish people, are towards and the drinking is contributing to the licentiousness and to the attitude of anything goes, then you shouldn't participate then, because that's not going to be a good influence on you, and you're going to end off participating in and getting caught up in their attitudes and their behaviors.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome. Okay, everyone should have a blessed day. A good morning. God bless you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome.